Well, here we are at the University Technical College, a centre for excellence in the biomedical science area for 14 to 16-year-olds. This is part of the Biomedical Campus. This is a seat held by the Lib Dems, but Labour think that they can make it a Labour seat as well. I'm sure everybody else thinks that they can do very well here as well. Let's meet our panel today. Chumali Fernando for the Conservatives, Dr. Julian Huppert for the Lib Dems, Rupert Reid for the Greens, Daniel ZEICHNER for Labour, and Patrick O'Flynn for UKIP. Julian Huppert, we heard in that film that the lady thinks we should pay more for the NHS. Don't we need to do that?
We certainly need to get more support for the NHS. I mean, the NHS does an amazing set of things, and this government's done some things right, the last government did some things right. They both made serious errors, though. The Health and Social Care Act, which I voted against, was an error by this government. Labour's decision to squander billions of pounds on PFI contracts, their privatisation of Hinchinbrook when they put it out to tender, caused huge problems. So there are two key issues now. One is about money. The NHS says it needs at least £8 billion as a bare minimum to be able to keep going by 2020. My view is that our job as politicians isn't to squabble about that, but to find the money. So we've identified that. It does include some tax rises on wealthier people, closing a range of loopholes, but it will give that £8 billion by 2020. Tories don't know how they pay for that. Labour have said they won't give the money the NHS needs. They've been very clear, £2.5 billion is a lot less than 8. The other thing, though, is mental health, which never gets talked about. We have to do much more to support mental health care.
Chumali Fernando, he says that the Tories don't know how they're going to pay for it.
The reality is it's so important to balance the books, and under this government the Conservatives have delivered £12.9 billion to the NHS, which is the highest any government has ever put into the National Health Service. The number of doctors is up by 9,500, the number of nurses is up by 7,000, and the number of midwives is up by 2,200. In the autumn statement we pledged...
So why does everybody think there's a crisis then, if they've never had it so good?
Well, the NHS is actually a big black hole. You cannot budget properly for the NHS because people come in with an emergency, or someone might come in for a stomach operation. The doctor will find that actually there's a heart condition that's underlying there. That has to be treated. So what we pride ourselves is delivering an NHS that is free at the point of delivery. And
OK, let's bring in the Greens. Rupert Reid, £12 billion, you're saying. Where's that money coming from?
So we, Stuart, are willing to tax things that other parties won't tax. We're willing to put in a wealth tax. The richest 1% should pay their fair share. And also we're willing to cut things that the other parties won't cut. We'd cut Trident, we'd cut fossil fuel and nuclear subsidies. So we can find the money. But the real issue, Stuart, is why does the NHS spending go up year on year? And the answer is twofold. Firstly, it's because more and more of the NHS is being privatised by Labour and now by the Coalition. And that makes it more expensive, not less. We in the Greens are the only ones who say, keep our NHS public, let's have 0% of the NHS be in the private sector. And secondly, it's because we're becoming less and less healthy as a nation. Mental health is becoming worse. Yes, why is that? It's because inequality is going up. Cancer rates are going up. Why is that? It's because the environment's getting worse. Only the Green Party has joined up policies to tackle the causes of ill health.
Patrick O'Flynn, you're only putting £3 billion into the NHS. That's not enough when you hear what they've got to say.
Well, it's odd, isn't it, that the coalition parties are the ones running to the end of their gardens and shaking the magic money tree. Ours is the only plan for extra resources that's been fully verified by an independent economic body. But if you talk to the folks up the road in Addenbrooke's, the senior health professionals, they're very conscious that Cambridge competes, I think it's with Milton Keynes, as the fastest growing city in the whole of the country. And, you know, it has this impression as a very young city, but in fact, if you talk to the professionals, it also does have a very high population of frail elderly people, and we've had a winter crisis where actually in Cambridge the health service held together extremely well, but clearly resources are the biggest issue.
Regardless of where the money is coming from, £3 billion isn't enough, is it?
Well, £3 billion is what we would guarantee over the sort of steady state rise in NHS spending. Of course, we can say that the proceeds of growth, which is what to a certain extent the Liberals and entirely the Tories are talking about. Yes, if the economy grows strongly, of course the NHS will be a top priority for extra public spending. At least we have £3 billion a year properly funded and guaranteed.
You've only got £2.5 billion.
Not at all, Stuart. Good morning. The clips we heard earlier echo exactly what I'm hearing from mums and dads and families across Cambridge at the moment. There's a real crisis, particularly at a place like Addenbrooke's, where sadly you've now got a 1 in 5 chance of waiting more than 4 hours if you go to accident and emergency. Labour's the only party, actually, that said exactly where the money will come from. That would be a mansion tax.
Is it a lot less?
No, it's not, because the £2.5 billion is on top of the money that the others are talking about, because if you listen carefully to what they're saying, it's cracking down on tax loopholes. We've been hearing this for the last 5 years. So this is real money for the NHS.
Well, the mansion tax you got from the Lib Dems, didn't you?
Well, I don't know what their policy is anymore, but ours is specifically for the NHS, and that's what matters. Well, what no one's mentioned so far is the problem is older people who can't get out of hospital because this government has cut local government so much.
He's shaking his head.
I'm just flabbergasted by what Daniel says. I mean, the £2.5 billion is not on top of the £8 billion. That's been made very, very clear in debate after debate after debate. And then in which case you haven't said where you get that £8 billion from. Your figures about
Julian. The same place as you. No, economic growth in the future.
But that's not what we're getting it from. We're getting it from those tax rises. That's the largest single amount. So I'm afraid that's not right. The Addenbrooke's figures you give are scaremongering and are not accurate.
Have you been to Addenbrooke's recently, Julian?
I have been many times.
To the people.
All right,
I have been many times.
Hang on.
I have been many times. And it is really important to listen to what the BMA have been saying, because they don't want people to make up figures, to exaggerate fears. We should have an NHS that is much, much better. But that will not happen by just squabbling about it.
Chamali Fernando,
I think
creeping privatisation from both Labour and the Tories.
Labour first were the ones to privatise the NHS. Bear with me. The issue is simple. No one wants to hear the Punch and Judy politics of the Labour and the Lib Dems, and people are tired of that. It's very important that we continue to strive towards an NHS that is free at the point of delivery, and to add to Rupert's comments in terms of why the NHS is becoming...
Just address the creeping privatisation claim, first of all.
If we explain privatisation, it's not that patients should have to pay for services. We are not creating an NHS where the patient at the point of delivery, at the point of need, has to pay for the NHS. There have been a minor increase, far less than under the Labour government, in terms of privatisation, and that is just an efficiency in savings.
One last
Andrew Lansley's reforms were tried out here. We just wasted millions of pounds on a tendering process which took us back to the beginning. Huge amounts of money wasted on that privatisation.
Okay,
we'll stop it.
No, we can't keep going backwards and forwards.
I'm afraid Daniel's not right. More money was spent on Labour's tendering of Hinchingbrook, and under Labour, private contracts in the NHS went from 1.1 billion to 7.5 billion. Those are the figures.
Let's move.
Becoming a dual conversation.
It was announced Hinchingbrook was more and caused far more harm to healthcare.
You'll be
right. Let us move on. Have you finished? Yeah, OK. Let's move on to housing. Chamali Fernando, your right to buy scheme can only deplete, as we've heard from lots of housing associations, the housing stock. And that's a bad thing, isn't it, surely?
No, it's not the way it works. In terms of right to buy, it's so critical that we continue to build, and successive governments have failed in that regard. However, you would have heard David Cameron earlier this morning. He confirmed that there is housing stock in London and places like Cambridge where properties are worth such a large amount, and actually he cited an example of properties worth over £1 million, which you could sell off and then used to build another 8 homes.
But it takes a long time to build those extra homes, doesn't it?
Well, we're committed to, for example, building 200,000 new starter homes to allow those under the age of 40 to access the property market and buying property at 25% below market value. We're committed to continuing our house building programme within housing associations and social housing. Ultimately, it is all down to continuing to build and making sure that the properties people live in are habitable. I've been around the constituency.
Let's bring in Daniel ZEICHNER on this. Labour were good at targets, but didn't build many houses.
No, we were building houses up until the financial crisis, and then, of course...
No, you had lots of policies, but you didn't build a lot of houses.
We did build lots of houses, actually, by the end. And also, what's important is, in an area like this, we put in the transport infrastructure, like the guided bus, to make it happen. But let me come back on this idea of selling off the housing association houses. It's a nonsense policy. We saw what happened before. At the last election, the Conservatives promised to replace the ones that were sold. They haven't done that, and they won't do that in the future. But what Labour will do for an area like this is tackle the real problem in the private rented sector, where so many people are seeing rents shooting up, short-term tenancies. We'll give people 3-year tenancies with guarantees. That will make a real difference in Cambridge.
You want to give priority to local people, yeah?
Yeah, and in Cambridge I think that's exactly the right priority, because ordinary working people in Cambridge are being forced out of Cambridge. It's been going on for decades, and it's becoming a really acute factor. Even if you're working in Cambridge, you know, unless you're in one of these elite science, high-tech jobs, you're struggling to just have a basic standard of living. You're being forced out, and part of that is why we need an Australian point-star migration system, so that the migrants we get in, a place like Cambridge, can draw the best in the world, the best talents. What we don't need is
but where are they going to live if you only give priority to people who live there?
Well, if you're talking about high-skilled migrants in high-value employment, they can look after their own housing arrangements, frankly. My priority is for the working people of
What about
Cambridge.
working people who want to move, say, to be near their children or near their parents? How are they going to do it?
Well, we have to reduce the demand on the housing stock. And we also have to prioritise the supply. A city like Cambridge, fast-growing, with a relatively tight green belt around it, housing is always going to be a priority. And the social housing that was bought through Right to Buy has largely not been replaced. The social housing stock is depleted. Now, even for some of the new private housing developments, if I just finish this point, we're not getting just buy-to-let, we're getting buy-to-leave, where wealthy foreign buyers are buying up the new builds and just relying on capital appreciation. And that's a disgrace.
Let me bring in Rupert Reid. Do you want to build 500,000 social rental homes by 2020? Does that mean you would build on Greenbelt?
No, we want to build on brownfield sites across the country. We would prioritise those areas that need regeneration, places in the North East, in the Midlands, South Wales, etc. But let me come back to the question on right to buy, Stuart. Can I just talk about right to buy?
Yeah, OK,
it's so important, because we are the only party that will end the Thatcherite madness of right to buy. Labour can't be trusted on this issue. They don't have a serious policy on it. We're going to build 500,000 houses that will stay as social housing forever. If you have right to buy, no matter what houses you build, they're going to go into the private sector.
Do you own your own house, Rupert?
Let's talk about...
That's a fair ambition to own your own property?
Let's talk about this place here, and brownfield sites around here to ease the congestion in the housing market surely don't exist, do they? You are going to have to go on Greenbelt.
We are the one party that is saying the growth in Cambridge can't go on forever, sprawling out into the countryside in an uncontrolled way, in the way that the other parties are doing. So we want to build on brownfield sites.
Where?
We want to build... Well, there are brownfield sites. Part of Northstowe is a brownfield site. So if Northstowe is done properly, then it can be an acceptable way of expanding housing in this area. But what we don't want to do is to see the green belt destroyed, and that's what the other parties are putting at risk.
Julian Huppert, where would you draw that red line round the outside of the city?
Well, I think we have a local plan which does that, and it is essential to get affordable and social housing here in Cambridge and across the country. It's something we've pushed for. Labour actually sold off far more than they built. They reduced the social housing stock by 421,000 during their time in office, and almost unbelievably, we've built more council houses in these 5 years than in Labour's 13 years. I think we need to build far, far more of them. It's something which we set a scheme to do here in Cambridge, a total of 2,000 extra council houses. I think the right to buy is a really bad idea for all the reasons that have been set out. We have to have that affordable social housing. We would allow places to stop the right to buy because I think it would be damaging somewhere like here in Cambridge. Across the country, you have to get that stock up there. 300,000 homes a year means we can start to get house prices down to a sensible level. And I agree with Daniel on the private rented sector, which is why I propose legislation much like he outlines.
Let's move on to another sticky subject here, which is congestion. What would you do with that, Rupert Reid?
We are the one party that has a plan that will actually address this. We want to re-regulate the buses. We want to massively improve cycling and walking, including 20 miles an hour speed limits. And we're the one party that's brave enough to say Cambridge needs a congestion charge. It's worked in London, it's worked in Durham. Only if you have the will to actually tackle rising congestion, to actually give drivers and lorries a disincentive for driving in, only then will you actually improve the level of congestion and air pollution that we have in Cambridge. Air pollution killing 100 people a year here on the government's own figures. The real figure probably much higher.
Congestion on the A14, though, that's important for the economy of the region. What would you do about that?
Well, again, we're the one party that has the courage to say endless road building just means more and more cars and lorries on the road forever. What we want to do is instead put the money into rail. Investment in rail, Stuart, could take a lot of that freight off the roads, and that's the real long-term solution.
Patrick O'Flynn.
Well, if you drive up and down the A14 and you know it needs massive refurbishment, a city like Cambridge, a small, beautiful, ancient city with relatively few major routes in, is always going to be one of the more traffic congested places. What I would like to see, rather than huge pie-in-the-sky plans under the city deal, is some basic improvements, some of the traffic light phasing. If you're driving down Castle Hill, those traffic lights at the Northampton Street turn-off, they're horrendous. There must be a better way of doing that. And promoting cycling, fine, I agree with that, but for a significant proportion of the Cambridge population, particularly the frail elderly people, cycling is not a solution. It's only a solution for the sort of young and reasonably
But
vigorous.
if we get more people cycling, that's good for everybody.
Julian
It takes cars off the road.
I mean, I know you're very keen on cycling, but actually, if you don't solve the congestion problem and you don't get more parking, say, out on a campus like this, people are just going to leave the area.
Well, I think there's a whole series of issues we've touched on. I mean, on the A14, it was badly designed. Anybody who knows those ridiculous right-angle junctions will know they have to be fixed, which is why I've been pushing to sort that out. I also fought against the idea of making it a toll road, something that would just divert more traffic through villages and other areas. And yes, cycling is a core part of it. We have a third of trips in Cambridge to work or education are done by bike. If we can get that higher, that will clear space on the roads for those people, Patrick quite rightly says, who are not reasonably going to cycle. We also need to support buses, giving young people discounts on buses, London-style regulation here, and rail is critical. East-West Rail, as well as the new station up
Let
by
me bring in
by the
Jamali
Science
Fernando.
Park.
In terms of widening of the A14, it was actually the Lib Dems who blocked it initially. It's going ahead, and it will be good for Cambridge because Cambridge doesn't really have a proper ring road. Whilst I applaud Rupert's sentiments in terms of cycling and in terms of housing, the reality is all of these cost money. You asked earlier about brownfield sites in Cambridge. We do have a few areas take up by Newmarket Road. There are those big warehouses. They could be moved elsewhere, and that's a ripe area for regeneration, and we need to think this is a city that prides itself in its aesthetic beauty. I would like to see Cambridge renew its application to become a World Heritage Site, and any development we have in Cambridge should not be piecemeal. It should be looking at a future vision for this city. For example, take Canary Wharf in London.
No,
I wouldn't agree with high-rise buildings, but it was an idea of let's develop the whole area.
Walking and cycling in the centre of Cambridge is really important, but getting the A14 finally done, we've been talking about this for years, haven't we? And Ed Balls was in the city yesterday.
What about the climate impacts, Daniel? What about dangerous climate change?
And he was absolutely clear that it will stay in the programme, which is really important for people across the region. But on buses, no one said very much about that. We have one operator who dominates the system in Cambridge at the moment. We have to improve that, and I've been arguing for many years for regulation like in London and a smart card so you don't have those long queues getting on and off the buses. And Labour's very clear, this time we're not just going to leave it to local councils to see if they want to regulate the buses. This is so important for Cambridge. Better public transport will unlock all the other things that we want to do in Cambridge.
You see, Stuart, no one else has joined up policies. No one is addressing the real, deep, long-term issue, dangerous climate change. They all want to build more roads and have more and more emissions forever. Only the Green Party's got a joined-up view on this.
One last thought from you, Patrick and Flynn?
Daniel mentioned we've been talking about the A14 for years and nothing's happened. Well, nothing certainly happened during 13 years of Labour government. I think Britain needs a change. Britain needs new politics, and so does Cambridge. And UKIP is off.
Yeah, no, we're not going to do that. Sorry.
Okay, you asked.
Okay, let's have a look at the week in the election now as we do it in 60 seconds with Deborah McGurran.
In Labour's manifesto this week, they set out plans for the public sector to be able to bid for rail franchises.
Let's have a public sector operator put in a bid, as they did on the East Coast Main Line. They delivered money for the Treasury and cut fares and actually did a better service than some of these private companies.
The Lib Dems manifesto pledged education funding from cradle to college, and they denied that the controversy over tuition fees is only their problem.
Every party has a pretty unattractive record on university finance.
The Tories announced their plans to give housing association tenants the right to buy.
What we're doing is giving rights to those tenants, and if they want to buy their own home, they can do so.
And the Work and Pensions Secretary tried his hand at bingo calling.
Legs 11, 1, 1, 11. That's pretty good.
Not got very high marks then for him.
No, I wouldn't have said so, no.
There is one other candidate standing in this election here. That's Keith Alexander Garrett. He's standing in Cambridge on a ticket of removing the politicians. Our thanks to all of our guests here today. You can see a full list of the candidates on the BBC website, bbc.co.uk, election 2015. From us, goodbye.